Hi, I'm Peter Rowlett.
And I'm Katie Steckles. And Peter, what is today's mathematical object?
Today's mathematical object is a guitar, and I am not the most musical of people. I do not know how to play a guitar, so I've brought an expert along with us. Welcome, Sam.
Hello, I'm Sam Hartburn, and I'm a maths author and editor. And I should say I don't know how to play a guitar either, apart from strumming it. But I do know something about how it works, and particularly the maths behind it, which I'm quite interested in. So I'm coming at it from that expertise rather than an expert guitar player.
Well, that's the sort of expertise we're into. The mathematical how behind the thing is what we want. Yes. Yeah.
Perfect. So a guitar has strings that vibrate like that and make a noise. And some of the maths behind the strings is quite interesting. So it produces a sound wave, which is a longitudinal wave caused by the vibrations. So the vibrations increase the pressure in the air. So there are waves of increased and decreased pressure. And when I was binge listening to your podcast a few weeks ago in preparation for this, I heard you talking about the slinkies and how you can visualize a longitudinal wave in a slinky. So that's a nice tie-in. So that's what's happening when you pluck the string. It makes an increased pressure of air particles, and then that pushes the next air particles along to make this longitudinal sine wave that goes along.
I guess I'm trying to imagine how this works, but does that kind of expand outwards from the guitar string in all directions at the same time?
That's a very good question. I think it probably does, to some extent.
Yeah, because you can hear it from wherever you're standing, I guess.
Yeah, so it must be a circular sine wave.
So it sort of buzzes a load of nearby air molecules into other ones.
Yeah, and then pushes them outwards.
I'm enjoying how normally we're on this podcast trying to describe things that are quite inherently visual, but in this case it's a thing that you can't actually see anyway. So like all of us are just imagining this, including those of us who are currently looking at a guitar.
Just imagine it. It would be nice if you could see them coming out from the guitar strings but no. So what's nice about this, so the frequency, or how fast the string vibrates, determines the pitch. So that's one of the things that determines the pitch. Is also you've got the tension of the string and the thickness of the string and all other sorts of things like that. So you pluck a thick string and it makes a low note, and you pluck a different string and it makes a higher note. And then if you change the length of the string by pushing down on one of the frets, then it makes a higher note than it did before.
I guess this is one of the things that, like, if you've not looked at a guitar close up, you might not realise this, but the strings are all actually different thicknesses.
Yes.
And like when you buy new strings for a guitar, you have to buy the right one because they come in packets with the note on them. But you kind of, you've got to make sure you put the right type of string in each place.
Yeah, that's right. They're different thicknesses, and I think they're made of different things as well. So on this one, the bottom 4 strings are sort of gold steel material, and then the top 2, I think, are some sort of nylon. So that's what gives them the different pitches as well. And I guess that's because you can't get a high enough tension on the steel to get the high notes or something like that. I'm just making this up. This is a guess. But that seems feasible.
Yeah, that's a material science podcast. That's a totally different podcast.
Absolutely.
But so the thickness and the material and the length and the tension, all that, what is that? Is that affecting how much the thing vibrates?
Yeah, it's affecting how it vibrates, so then that affects what the pitch is. So I'll go into a little bit more about how the actual string vibrates, because this is what fascinated me when I looked into it. So there's a wave equation, and that models the displacement of any point on the string at any time. So it's relative to its position along the string, so how far along the string it is, and relative to time. So it's actually a differential equation. So you've got d squared y by dt squared equals c squared times d squared y by dx squared, which I realise is a really long, stupid thing to read out. But basically the second derivative of the point with respect to time is c squared, which is the velocity, so the velocity squared times the second derivative of the point with respect to its position along the string.
I feel like this is the kind of podcast equivalent of that Cedric Villani book where he's just dropped in chunks of raw latex. It's like that. You just have to listen to someone read out an equation and parse it as they go along. I mean, we can probably do a slightly more kind of realistic explanation of what that equation says, right?
Okay, so in this equation, y is the displacement of the string or the displacement of the point on the string from its normal position, so how far up or down it's gone. T is time, and x is how far along the string from its end point the point is. So this wave travels along the string, it hits one end, and then it's bounced back and travels back. So you've got these waves bouncing back and interfering with each other. And that gives a periodic function. So when you solve this differential equation, you get a periodic function. It's got period 2L. So it's not a sine wave as we would normally think of them, but we can turn it into a sum of different sine waves using Fourier expansion, which I'm definitely not an expert in, and I'm not going to go into all that now. But basically, you get something that's along the lines of sine of x plus sine of 2x plus sine of 3x plus ... That's really simplified. But what this is the harmonics of the sound that's coming out. So when you hear the sound, so if I play the string, it's an E. But you're actually hearing lots of different pitches there. You're hearing the fundamental bass note, which is the E, then you're hearing an octave above, which is an E above, then you're hearing a little bit above that, so an octave plus another fifth above that, which is the next one, and that's what all these sine waves are. So the frequency of the first sine wave gives you the bass note E, and then the frequency of the second sine wave in this sum, so that's sine of 2x, so that's twice the frequency of the initial sine wave, gives you an octave above. And the frequency of the third one, sine 3 of x, so that's 3 times the frequency of the initial sine wave, gives you the next note up, next harmonic, which is a perfect fifth above the previous one.
And I guess that they'll be kind of more above that, but they're maybe too quiet to hear. Or...
Yeah, and in fact, I don't think you can necessarily hear them at all when you're just listening to it because you're so used to it. But if you hit something like a tuning fork is made so that it only has the initial frequency. So when you hear that, you're hearing just a pure sine wave, where anything else that you listen to, you're hearing like all the sum of these sine waves all interfering with each other and all the different harmonics.
Yeah, it's really interesting to imagine this because you sort of picture it as like if you pluck the guitar string and it's vibrating, if you then like took a very instant still photo, you'd be able to see the actual string is sort of curving in a wave shape. But I guess if, as you say, it's sort of that happens, but it also kind of reflects off the ends of the guitar string. So the amount of the length of the string, I guess, makes a big difference to how quickly that reflection happens.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it just means you've got all these kind of layered kind of sounds happening all at the same time on top of each other. And I guess this is like what timbre is about, right? So that's the kind of the voice of an instrument. Like different instruments have different ways of layering up these sine waves and creating a sound, and that's why they have different distinct noises. So the one for a guitar is because of these strings, I guess.
Yeah, and because of the chamber. So it's like a guitar has a big chamber that the air resonates in, so that will affect how many of the different harmonics you can hear. And I think in general, the bigger the chamber, the more resonance there is, the more of them you can hear, and that's what makes a really rich sound.
So the chamber is the hole behind the strings, right? And
that's right, yeah. So there's a hole behind the strings.
It's the wood bit, yeah.
Is resonance the sort of sound bouncing around? Is that right?
Yes,
sort of
that's
echoing.
right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
There's actually this thing you can do called vocalists do called overtone singing. So when you're singing as well, your vocal cords are vibrating, and that produces a similar sort of thing with lots of different pitches coming out. But because you can change the shape of your mouth, there are different shapes that will then accentuate certain of the harmonics that you can hear. So you can actually do something where you can sing 2 notes at once.
My instinctive response to you saying you can change the note with the shape of your mouth was to go, ooh. But obviously that is exactly what you mean, yeah.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. So you can sing 2 notes at once, so you'll have this bass note that's going, and then this sort of high-pitched thing where you can do that you've got a whole different scale going on that's completely different to the bass note that you're singing. So, which I cannot do, but if you have a look for overtone singing on Google, then you'll find some very exciting videos of people doing that.
So one of the things you mentioned there was that you've got like a sine wave, and then if you do sine of 2x, that's like an octave up from there.
Yeah.
Right. So this is a thing about how the scale works, right? It's about ratios, isn't it?
Absolutely right. So the ratio between the lengths of the strings, the lengths of two strings, will tell you what the difference in pitch is between those strings. So on a guitar, say, we've got the bass note E. If you make that string half the length by putting your finger on the 12th fret, it will be an octave above. So that's exactly half the length. And this was something, I think Pythagoras was the first, or is supposedly the first, to discover these ratios, that lengths that are in small integer ratios like 2:1 or 3:2 or 5:4 or whatever are harmonic to the human ear. We like them. That's actually because of all the harmonics that we talked about before. So when you play an E, a bass E, you've got all these harmonics that you can hear above it. And when you play something above that, I think that's one. Yeah, it's that one. They've got a lot of the same harmonics because you've got the sine waves that are in similar frequencies to each other. So you're actually hearing a lot of the same thing when you hear those two notes. So they sound nice together. Whereas if it's just, say, a little way off, say an E and then one semitone up, which is a minor second, they haven't got a lot in common. So they don't sound so nice together. It's a bit dissonant, I think is the word.
Yeah, this is stirring vague memories of my grade 5 music theory, where it was, thirds and fifths are nice.
Yep.
And fourths and sevenths are spooky, and seconds are awful.
Right.
It's just like when you're a kid, you learn things in this way, but actually that's genuinely kind of what happens in terms of the way you process it. Like you hear these sort of very dissonant clashing notes that are, I guess, yeah, as you say, because you're hearing a lot of different frequencies that don't go well together. But like a fifth. So were you saying like if you go to 3x, is that a fifth above?
Yeah, so if the ratio is 3:2, then it's a fifth above. So the 3x is actually 1 octave plus 1/5 above the initial note, but the ratio of 3:2 gives you a perfect fifth, and then a ratio of 5:4 gives you a major third. So that's what your basic chords are made up of. Usually when you play a chord, you've got the 1, the 3 and the 5, and they all sound lovely together.
I mean, for some bands, that's all you need.
Absolutely. And if I could play the guitar, I'd play you a chord now, but all I can do is strum one string at a time, so I won't do that.
Oh, let's all imagine someone playing a nice chord.
Yeah.
Done.
Beautiful.
Okay.
So this is what we say, that these perfect ratios, these small integer ratios, give us these consonant sounds. But there's a bit of betrayal in here. I want to warn you, when I first heard about this, I felt like I'd been betrayed by music for my whole life. So, on a guitar, halfway up is the octave above, and then, let me find it, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So the 7th fret will give you a perfect fifth above. It calls it a perfect fifth. I actually measured these frets and where they come to on the guitar. So the full length of the string is 666 millimetres.
What?
I know.
That's surely not a coincidence.
Just gloss over that. It's not a devil's guitar.
Yeah.
Yeah. The 12th fret to get the octave is at 333 millimetres, so that's perfect. That's 2:1.
Good. Yep.
Where would you expect the 7th fret to be to get the perfect fifth at a ratio of 3:2?
So we're looking for so is it 2 to 3? So is it like, do you want 2/3 of that length?
Yeah, so the original string is 666 and you want your perfect fifth to be at 2/3 of that length.
Which would be 444.
444.
I guess.
Yeah. So I measured this and it was not 444, it was 440. So that's slightly, it's not a lot off, but it is slightly off. You'd expect it to be
it's a
exact.
Precision, it's an engineered, precision instrument.
And
right?
I imagine my measurement isn't completely precise, but then we go to a third. So a third is the 7th fret along, and this should be a ratio of 5:4 of the original string. So that's a bit harder to work out. So I'll tell you that it should be 532.8 millimeters long. And when I measured it, it was actually 522. So that's a bigger difference. So, any clue why this could be?
I feel like materials science has a role to play here. I don't know if it's some kind of messy real-world stuff.
It's not material science. It's actually because of the way these ratios work. So, music goes around in cycles. I don't know if you know, you have a note C, you have another note C an octave above, and another note C an octave above that. And then you'll have a G, a perfect fifth above each C. So say you've got a C, then a perfect fifth gives you G, and then you've got another C, and then another perfect fifth gives you another G. So you'd want your two Gs to be an octave apart from each other, a ratio of 2:1. The problem is that when you multiply these small number ratios together, no number of perfect fifths is going to get you a whole number of octaves, because you've got a ratio of 3:2 and a ratio of 2:1, and they've got nothing in common.
So if I start on a note like C and I keep adding perfect fifths to it, I add one perfect fifth, I get to a G, and then I add another one, and another one, and another one. At no point do I get back to a C.
At no point do you get back to a C, yeah. And I suppose the other way that you can think about it is a perfect fifth above the first harmonic should be one octave above the perfect fifth that's above the second harmonic. But because of the ratios work, this is not going to happen.
So that feels like a sort of, you're going around a rectangle. You can go an octave and then a perfect fifth, or you can go a perfect fifth and then an octave. You feel like you ought to end up in the same place, but you don't. Right.
Exactly, you don't end up in the same place. You have a little gap between them, which spoils things, so you can't get all the way around the cycle.
I mean, this feels entirely like Pythagoras' fault.
Yeah, we could blame Pythagoras, certainly.
Assuming it was Pythagoras indeed that first did this, because obviously anything could be the case.
Absolutely. So in modern music now, we've modified our scales. So our scale from C to C is made up of 12 notes.
That's the 12 keys on a piano between a C key and in a C key. There's like some black keys and some white keys, yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, okay, yeah, I was expecting the number 8 to appear, but the 12 is because of the black keys. Right.
No, you forgot about flats and sharps. Yeah, it's 12 semitones. Yeah.
The chromatic scale, which includes all the notes from C to C. So we now have those so that they're equally spaced. So because there are 12 of them, and we want our final ratio from the initial note to an octave above to be 2:1, we need to multiply the lengths of the strings by 12th root of 2 each time.
Yeah, because if you do that 12 times, you'll get to a half. Yeah.
Exactly. So none of our intervals that we hear now these days, apart from an octave, are actually these small whole number ratios. We don't hear a perfect fifth. We don't hear a real major third. We hear these intervals that are slightly out because they're all irrational, basically. And this is where I felt my betrayal, that I thought music was pure and beautiful ratios in it. But no, it's been tempered with.
So is it like, so this is the modern scale? Like, does that mean that there was a previous time when musical instruments were set up in a different way, that they would do the actual ratios?
There have been loads of different ways, and there have been lots of mathematicians involved over the years in trying to work out ways to adjust scales so that the ratios work for as many different options as possible. I've got this lovely book called Music and Mathematical Offering. It's by David Benson, which I've got all my information from for today. And it goes through a list of lots of different tuning modes that have been worked out. And you read through and it's got like Euler, it's got Mersenne, it's got Kepler, it's got just all these mathematicians' names keep popping up, who have also worked on trying to make these ratios work in a nice musical sounding way.
So what is the problem that we're trying to solve? This is a sort of classic mathematical modeller's way of viewing the world. You know, what was happening in music that needed this thing to be changed?
That's a good question.
I'm thinking of your sort of medieval somebody following Robin Hood playing an instrument doesn't sound quite the same as a modern instrument. I mean, is this the sort of thing we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is a modern thing when we've got into digital music, that it's a lot easier to work if all your intervals between notes are the same. So you're going up by the same amount each time. So if you're thinking of the frequency of a note, which would just be a number measured in hertz, then it's a lot easier for a computer to work with something if you're going up by the same number each time.
I guess, would it just have been the case that prior to this you wouldn't be able to do much outside of an octave? Like, you can define the intervals, you can define what a fifth is and what a third is and what have you, but if you try and do a note that's a fifth above an octave, then you get something slightly different than if you do an octave above a fifth.
And the further you go on the same instrument, the weirder it starts to sound, is that right?
Mm. Yeah, I think so. And also that you'd have compositions, say, that would work in one key but not another key, because the intervals in each key would be slightly different. So on, say, a modern keyboard, on my keyboard, I've got a transpose button, and it will just move, it'll make all the notes higher or lower, and you can say, well, I wanted to play this in a D, but that's too low for me to sing along to, so I'm going to just transpose it up to F, and that'll be much better. Where if the intervals between the notes are different for different keys, then you can't do that, because if you transpose it up, then it won't sound right. So I think that's one reason. And some musicians don't like this equal temperament. Like, they prefer to have different keys sounding different, so you can have a composition for a particular key over another one.
Yeah, I guess you see a lot of like historical musical things that are like this in the key of whatever. And I guess, it's a musical decision, I guess, an artistic decision, what key to set something in. But yeah, if you play it on a different instrument that's tuned differently, you're obviously playing it in whatever key you need to play along with it. But yeah, so historically it was actually important. It was key, which key you were playing in.
Yeah, absolutely. You couldn't get away with playing in different keys, and that might mean that you couldn't play certain compositions on certain instruments, because if they are tuned to a particular key, then you just wouldn't be able to change that.
So what you're talking about there is a sort of European music. Do you know how it works in other cultures around the world?
I don't know in detail, but I know that in Indian music they definitely have a lot of intervals that we don't. So where we have semitones, that's the closest we go together. They have much smaller intervals in their notes. So that's why when you listen to Indian music, it sounds very different immediately. Like, you immediately know it's very different to the music that you're not used to hearing, because they've got these different intervals in it.
Or vice versa if you're used to hearing that one. Yeah, that makes sense.
Absolutely.
All right, so thank you ever so much for that. That's been really great. If people are interested in you and would like to find out more about the sort of things that you're up to, how can they do that?
They can visit my website, which is samhartburn.co.uk, or you can find me on Twitter, which is, again, just my name, @samhartburn.
And we're also on Twitter. I'm @Steckles, and Peter is @Peter Rowlett. I don't know why I said that for you. Peter usually says that. And the podcast itself is @MathsObjects.
Katie and I both blog at a website called aperiodical.com, and that's where you can find more episodes of this podcast.
And if you would like to get in touch, if you would like to suggest an object for us to feature in a future episode, or if you just want to send us a clip of you playing a chord that we can listen to, then please drop us an email, objects@aperiodical.com.
The music is Funk Game Loop by Kevin MacLeod, licensed under Creative Commons.
So you want three units one side and 2 units the other, so you want to split the whole thing into 5 and then...
Yeah.
Don't make me do maths. Everyone, please feel free to clip that out of context and use that clip everywhere.